Now we can turn to job growth. And first, we're just going to talk with you about some of the different segments in terms of job growth by industry. So we just want to look at what has happened with some of the things that have come back, gotten a little bit worse. One of the interesting things that we've seen come out is on the UPS, FedEx, and Amazon level, we've seen that they've already announced a large increase in short-term hires for the holiday season, which makes sense if you consider how people are purchasing more online, really avoiding stores. So you're going to see that online retail really start to pick up, which just means that they're going to need more processing, more people in the different facilities, making sure that things get to where they're supposed to go in a timely fashion. Now, this is why when we look at some of the different segments, we're going to see that federal, except U.S. Postal Service, the federal is going to, we saw that increase because we did have the census this year. We do have an election, so you're going to see a lot of that federal hiring come through. But at the same time, one of those things that we're going to start to see come up to be one of the bigger growth sides is going to be supply chain and transportation, just because we're going to have to see more holiday workers as we go through into the holiday season. Again, federal continue to see the total increase. When we look at performing arts, motion pictures, you have to consider how far, like the 7 and 6% looks really good. But again, it's a small number against a small number is still a small number, even though the percentages can look fairly large. So it's just nice as you're starting to come off the bottom, starting to see a little bit of a normalcy. But again, those headwinds still remain. Now, the electronics and appliance stores are starting to get a little bit, again, people back in the stores, buying those durable goods. You still want to be able to touch, feel, hold, really see what this is going to look like in my kitchen or something else. So this is why we're seeing an increase there, which again is we expect that to normalize a bit. The bigger issue is, some of these things coming back down, lodging, travel arrangements, and reservations. Again, next wave. And this is more because we're seeing people that were furloughed now either getting let go, or we're seeing some of this temporary work that is seasonal, again, go away. And this is a bigger problem. When we start to look at facilities, supports, and services, we expect that to start to increase, especially when we consider, again, coming back to that, the online purchases. Textile printing is one that's going to continue to be really see a lot of this pressure, which is why, again, we don't see much in terms of job growth because we think that there's going to be enough to offset some of these increases, which is why, again, we could just going to kind of hold to the side on here, especially as we get some of these offsetting declines that we've already heard announced across not only the airlines, but also in terms of logging, in terms of hospitality. These are the kind of things that are going to be a problem. And I mean, Jay Powell is trying as hard as he can to get those loggers back to work. But again, it's only so much he can actually do. So now when we turn to unemployment insurance, again, this is something where it remains elevated across the board. Persons claiming remains just below 30. We had an increase towards the end of the August. Again, we expect to see another elevated number just because these individuals continue to remain on unemployment. So the continuation is going to remain a problem. Now, specifically when we look at this going sideways, again, we saw some people coming back to work, and again, we're seeing that increase again, coming back to that job growth by industry. We're seeing these offsetting numbers. But the other concern, when you think about continuing claims, if you've been on unemployment since May, you feel very differently than when you did at the end of May than you do right now. You start to question yourself. You start to question your skills and can I get a job? And that, again, as you remain on unemployment, your uncertainty is only going to decrease your willingness to spend. And what are you looking to do as you struggle to find a job or find permanent work? Which again comes full circle to what are small businesses doing? So you're starting to see a little bit more of optimism again on the headcount additions. So the question is going to be, what do we start to see on some of these headcounts? We've come off the bottom. We talked about it in the first segment, in the first U.S. segment, really looking at, okay, well, your U.S. Small business is starting to feel a little bit better, starting to see some things opening. So you're going to start to see some of these people add headcount. But again, this is why when we talk about these headwinds, this is a nice tailwind that we're starting to see a little bit of a better outlook, a little bit better in terms of what people are looking at. But then when we shift and we look at the the shadow unemployment or underemployment, here you can start to see unemployed to not in the labor force. And here you can see that is continuing to remain at highly elevated levels in terms of just people who are not actively searching for a job. That could be because again, childcare, could be because there is a outstanding issue in terms of, well, I don't need to be looking for a job because I'm going to let this blow over, or my industry is gone, or my industry is not going to hire back the same way, so I have to go through job training or something else. So this index is going to be a problem when you consider the amount of people not in the labor force. So when you look at the unemployment number, those are people actively looking for a job. Then you can look at the underemployment, or people that are, should be working full time or maybe should be making more and they aren't. Again, these are all numbers to be considered. This is a big one because when we last week when we talked about people falling out of the workforce because of the childcare issues and because of Zoom and school and the uncertainty, this is going to remain a problem and sticky because you have people that had two incomes now down to one. Again, coming back to spending and coming back to just the overall growth of the U.S. GDP. Now, the other side of the equation is you have U.S. labor productivity output increasing per hour. So this is just incentivizing people to do more with less. When we talked about when I spoke on David Ramsden Wood's podcast, DRW, the hot take of the day, we talked about what is happening with the U.S. labor productivity, because you had companies that maybe were looking to fire or downsize or just lay people off, but couldn't come up with the reasons, because you have to assemble a reason why you're letting go one, two, or a group of individuals. So now you had a natural reason, COVID. You can kind of throw your hands up, be like, they're let go because of COVID. Sorry. Well, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a more productivity, more output, doing more with less. And again, this is something where, again, you're cutting cost. You have a tightening revenue, so you want to try to protect your margin. So a lot of these individuals are not going to be rushing back to hire and really kind of whittle this down, because you want to try to achieve a higher productivity output. And again, if you're looking at it on a per hour, if you're an hourly worker, this could be more overtime, this could be more benefits. So you will get some people that get an uplift because they will be making more because of overtime. Or just going from, let's say, 0.7 to 1 point when we're looking at part-time versus full-time. So again, this is something that is just optimizing things, people that are currently working. But again, when we look at temporary layoffs versus permanent job losses, they're going in the wrong direction. You're seeing more and more temporary layoffs becoming permanent. So the fact that these are inverse with each other remains a problem when you consider how are people looking at this. And when we look at the continuation of unemployment, you're just seeing those permanent job losses continue to own up. Because you can only furlough people for so long. You can only call them layoffs, and it's just a matter of you have to let them know, hey, we're not going to hire you back. You need to go somewhere else. So this is something that we're going to see continue, which is going to be, again, that overhang as we go through the remainder of the year. And when we look at just employment, because we've seen that bounce off the lows, we've seen the increases, especially on the non-farm payroll. Again, the manufacturing side disappointed. The expectation was for a growth of 46,000, came in at about 24,000. Again, that's the manufacturing side coming back to the efficiency levels. But when we look at total non-farm payroll, we've had these additions. But again, February to April, down 22.1 million, we haven't gotten back to those levels. And again, just because of maybe efficiencies or just the crowded nature of some of these companies with some of the jobs that were destined to be terminated, it's going to be hard to see that rally back, which is why here you can see that direction up in terms of the sharp moves in terms of the slopes. You're starting to see that kind of flatten out a little bit, which is going to continue through as we go through September, October. We should get a little bit of an increase as we go through the beginning of October as you get some of that holiday hiring. So that'll be a nice little bump. But again, that's seasonally expected. So we have to adjust for what is happening on a seasonal level, which is going to continue to disappoint. Now, rounding that out with just the amount of people that have left the loss of employment, you have to think of it in terms of the people on specific income levels. And here you can see under $25,000 a year, close to 60% have lost employment. And again, those levels remain relatively elevated until you get to about 100,000 or 99,000, where you had about 50%. The more surprising side is the amount of people that have lost their jobs 100,000 and above, because typically some of those jobs are a little bit stickier, harder to replace. Typically you have an ingrained knowledge, you're a little bit older, so you have more industry knowledge. So the fact that we've seen those increases is going to be a problem, because replacing those jobs is going to be harder, or finding jobs like that is going to be harder, which will take more time. Now, when you think about the top 1% versus the bottom 50%, when you look at the share of national income, you can see the trend. The trend has been moving in the wrong direction, and that leads us to social unrest. That leads us to the disenfranchised, the people who haven't been able to achieve that social mobility. So you have these individuals that are the ones that have been impacted the most from COVID, remain unemployed or are struggling to get unemployment. They don't have those benefits. Now you're starting to see riots, looting, people who are just struggling to really say, look, I need help and I can't find a job. And this is one of those interesting things, because again, this is not something that is new. This is something that has been moving since really the early 90s and has only continued to shift higher. And as we've seen the stock market rally aggressively off the lows, you have to have spare cash to put into the market, or you have to be an executive or someone who owns shares of a company to really benefit. And then when we look at it on a global level, the US remains at one of the highest in terms of top 1% versus bottom 50% versus others in the world, which again comes down to where we get some of the social unrest, specifically in the US in terms of the way it's going. The only real fix is getting individuals back to work, getting them the ability to work hard, and that hard work paying off with an increase in salary, an increase in that social mobility, which again has been the biggest issue as we've seen coming into the COVID era. Now, when we look at that the length of time in terms of jobs, the recession in terms of job length of unemployment, again, we went the steepest just because we had the lockdown, and we're starting to see the kind of flattening out. When we look at 2007, we see how long it took to get back to it, and it's just because the finance industry changed. You just didn't have people getting back to work the same way. And again, coming back to people that probably should have been let go, but were kept around because the money was there. It was easier just to not fire them or to just cut bonuses. And this is something where we continue to think that there's going to be a long-term, really years before we get back to this return to full employment, especially because of just the, again, 10 years of central bank stimulus, and we still remain in this level. And that's when we shift to the Indeed data, because I think it's great data, gives you some real-time information, because some of the other stuff can be a little bit slower. Like we had JOLT come out from the U.S. Census Bureau. But again, Labor Bureau. But the problem is that is age. This is looking at things in real time. And again, it's looking at Indeed, but they typically pick up a lot of these job postings. And you can see we're still down 19%. And we're seeing that flatlining overall, which is going to remain the problem. We saw that tightness, which we saw reflected in the data. The JOLT numbers saw that increase in August, which in July into August, which again, you see the Indeed.com really kind of picked that up, and now we're seeing that flatten out, and we're just not getting back to the levels that we need to be to get some of these people redeployed into the market. And this I think it's important just because we talked about spending when we consider high income versus medium income versus lower income. We have to consider, well, what are the job prospects? And here you can see the higher wages remain at almost a 25% decline. And this comes back to what I previously said. It's much harder to find a job at $250,000 versus 25, 45, 60,000. So that time frame is going to mean it just means you're going to be out of work longer. Now you should have, should have is a relative term. You should have more savings. You should have a little bit more creditability, so that you shouldn't feel the same type of pain that you would at the bottom third or even the middle third. But again, you seeing that kind of things are flattening out. Bottom third is flattening out. We had that spike and then things have kind of flattened out. This is going to be a problem when we consider inherent spending, because discretionary cash is key. And when we look at those higher wage jobs, they're just not coming around in the same way. So these are things that are going to continue to weigh on just that GDP. And really, when we talk about the normalization of the global economy, when you look to imports into the US, people aren't buying. Why? Because people at the higher level don't have the capital to buy it, or they don't feel confident buying, or they don't have jobs. These are things that are going to be a continuation in terms of those overhangs that we look at, which is why we remain concerned in terms of where the economy will shake out when we look to the U.S. Now, in the next segments, we're going to look at China, specifically Asia, with a focus on obviously China as well. And then when we start to go through Europe to see what's happening in some of these other areas.